There is a place that exists between this world and the next, not imagined, not invented by medieval minds hungry for metaphor, but attested to by mystics, taught by the Church, and glimpsed with terrible clarity by a young Polish nun in the 1930s whose name was Sister Faustina Kowalska. It is a place of purification, a place of longing so intense that no earthly word quite holds it. A place where souls who are saved, already past the danger of damnation, are nonetheless not yet fully ready to stand in the unmediated presence of God. And it is a place that Faustina visited, in spirit, more than once. What she saw there, and what she was told by those souls about what they desired most, is one of the most illuminating and forgotten aspects of her entire diary. It is the subject we have come to sit with today. To understand Faustina's encounters with the souls in purgatory, we must first understand what purgatory actually is, not what popular culture has made of it, not what centuries of distortion have sometimes suggested, but what the Church has always taught, and what Faustina's own visions so vividly confirm. Purgatory is not a second chance at salvation. It is not a courtroom where the verdict is still uncertain. Every soul in purgatory is a saved soul, a soul that has said yes to God at the defining moment of its existence, that has passed through death in a state of grace, that will without any doubt reach heaven. The issue is not whether they will arrive. The issue is that they are not yet ready to arrive. The reason for this unreadiness is something that our age has particular difficulty grasping: the reality of temporal punishment, the residue of sin that remains even after sin has been forgiven. When a person receives absolution in the sacrament of confession, the eternal guilt of sin is removed, the relationship with God is restored, the soul is no longer condemned. But the wound that sin leaves in the soul, the disorder it has introduced, the damage it has done to the soul's capacity to love purely and completely, none of this is automatically or instantly healed by forgiveness. A scar remains. And before a soul can stand in the full blinding light of the divine presence, that scar must be healed, that disorder must be resolved, that wound must be closed. The process of that healing, which happens, according to the Church's teaching, in a state after death, is what we call purgatory. Faustina understood this not as doctrine from a textbook, but as something she encountered face to face. Her diary records multiple experiences of contact with souls in purgatory, souls who appeared to her, who spoke to her, who asked her for prayers. And in those encounters, what she heard from them and what she was shown about their condition is both more tender and more sobering than anything we could construct from theological speculation alone. The first thing Faustina observed about the souls in purgatory was their suffering. This surprises people who have been told that purgatory is simply a long waiting room, a comfortable anteroom to paradise. But in Faustina's diary, the suffering she witnesses among these souls is real. It is intense. She describes the place itself as one suffused with a kind of misty, uncertain light, not the total darkness of hell, not the clear and blazing light of heaven, but something in between, something that speaks of incompleteness, of a journey not yet finished, of longing stretched to its utmost capacity. These souls are burning, not in the fire of punishment, though Faustina sometimes uses that imagery, but in the fire of desire. And it is the nature of that desire that unlocks the heart of everything she was shown about purgatory. What do the souls in purgatory desire most? This is not a rhetorical question. It is the question that Faustina brings back from her encounters with them, and her answer is precise and unmistakable. They desire prayer, not comfort, not consolation, not the assurance that everything will be fine. Prayer. The concrete, specific, offered on their behalf intercession of people still living on earth. And behind that desire for prayer lies the deeper desire that prayer serves, the desire for God Himself, the desire to be finished with the process of purification and to enter at last into the fullness of His presence. Faustina records that souls in purgatory came to her and asked her to pray for them. In one of the most striking entries in her diary, she describes being visited by a deceased sister from her own convent, someone she had known in life, who appeared to her after death in a condition of suffering and implored Faustina to intercede for her. Faustina prayed. She offered her prayers and her sufferings on behalf of this soul, and later she was shown that the soul had been released from purgatory and had entered heaven. The transaction was real. The prayer had done something. The suffering of the living, offered in love for the suffering of the dead, had accelerated the process of purification in a way that nothing else could. This is the teaching that modern people find most difficult to receive, not because it is illogical, but because it requires us to take seriously a world that extends beyond what we can see and touch, a world in which the prayers we say in our kitchens and our cars and our chapels actually travel somewhere, and actually do something for souls who have no other way of being helped. The doctrine of the communion of saints, the Church's teaching that the living and the dead remain connected in one spiritual body, that love does not end at the grave, that the prayers of the living can assist the dead, just as the prayers of the saints in heaven intercede for the living, is one of the oldest and most consistent teachings in Christian history. But Faustina gives it flesh and urgency. She does not merely teach it, she lives it. She is visited by the dead. They speak to her. They ask for help, and the help she gives makes a difference that can be seen. We must pause here and ask a question that honest minds cannot avoid. Why? Why does purgatory work this way? Why should the prayers of someone on earth have any effect on the purification of a soul that has already passed from this world? Why would God structure the afterlife so that the dead are, in some sense, dependent on the living? The answer, Faustina understood, lies in the nature of love itself. Love is relational. It flows between persons. It was not God's design that any soul should travel the road of purification in isolation, that souls should be deposited in purgatory and simply wait, alone, until enough time had passed. God designed that souls in purgatory remained connected to the living church, precisely so that love could continue to operate across the boundary of death. The living pray for the dead. The dead, once released, pray for the living. The church on earth, the church in purgatory, and the church in heaven form a single living communion in which love and intercession flow in all directions, constantly, eternally. Before we go further, it is worth pausing on another dimension of what Faustina encountered, one that is rarely discussed, but that is essential for understanding the full weight of what purgatory means. She was not merely shown the suffering of these souls in a vague or symbolic way. She was shown the specific nature of what purification requires. The souls she encountered were not suffering arbitrarily. They were being purified of very precise things, particular attachments, particular wounds, particular forms of disorder in their love that prevented them from being fully transparent to God's light. One soul might be held back by the residue of pride, not pride that had destroyed them, not pride that had cut them off from God entirely, but a subtle self-sufficiency, a lingering tendency to trust in their own strength rather than in grace, that had to be slowly, painfully dissolved. Another might be held back by the traces of a habitual coldness, a failure to love as completely as love required, a withholding of self that had been so practiced in life that its undoing required real time and real fire. The point is that purgatory is not generic. It is personal. It is tailored to each soul with the same precision that a good physician applies to each patient, not the same medicine for every illness, but the exact treatment for the exact wound. This precision is itself an expression of mercy. God does not send souls to purgatory out of punishment for its own sake. He sends them, or rather, they enter it, because they are not yet ready for the alternative, because He will not receive a soul that is not yet fully healed, not because He is harsh, because He is love, and love cannot be fully received by a heart that is still partly closed. Purgatory is the process by which the heart is opened the rest of the way. And every prayer that reaches a soul in purgatory is in this sense a kind of surgery. Gentle, precise, cooperating with the work that God is already doing, speeding what would otherwise take longer, reducing the distance between where the soul is and where love is waiting to receive it. There is a particular passage in Faustina's diary that speaks directly to this dimension of purgatory's mercy. She was shown that many souls who appear to the living as having died suddenly or without preparation had in fact, in the final interior moments of their existence, made acts of surrender that no observer could have seen. A person who appeared to die in their sleep, whose external life showed little evidence of faith, may have made in the last seconds of consciousness a movement of the heart toward God so small and so private that no human eye could detect it. These souls were saved. They were in purgatory, and they were there partly because no one was praying for them, because the people who loved them in life had assumed from the outside that there was nothing to pray for. Faustina's diary is a corrective to this assumption. It says, "Pray for everyone you have lost because you do not know what happened in those final moments, and because the mercy of God operates in spaces too small for human observation." This is not false comfort. It is not a guarantee that everyone is saved or that the reality of judgment can be bypassed. Faustina also saw hell. She recorded that vision with a specificity that makes it one of the most terrifying passages in the entire diary, and she was clear that souls who die in a state of complete rejection of God do not end up in purgatory waiting for prayers to liberate them. The distinction matters. Purgatory is for those who died in God's grace. Hell is for those who did not. The two are not the same place, and no amount of prayer changes the latter into the former. But within the realm of those who are saved, within the vast population of souls who passed through death in some state of grace, even imperfect, even incomplete, even last minute, purgatory is operating, and prayer is reaching them, and love is doing its quiet, persistent, effective work. Faustina also perceived something else about the souls in purgatory that her diary makes unforgettable. She perceived their gratitude. When she prayed for them, when she offered her sufferings for them, they responded with a gratitude so overwhelming that she could barely receive it. These were not nameless abstractions. They were real people, people who had lived, who had loved imperfectly, who had failed and risen and failed again, who had died with the mercy of God at their side, but with work still unfinished in their souls. And they knew who was praying for them. They felt it. Each prayer reached them like a breath of air reaches someone who has been underground too long. Not merely noticed, but desperately needed, life-restoring, the difference between enduring and being released. This is one of the places where Faustina's mystical experience most powerfully intersects with the ancient practices of the Church. Masses for the dead, prayers for the deceased at gravesides, the rosary offered for those who have gone before us, All Saints' Day, when the Church in glory is celebrated, and All Souls' Day the very next morning, when the Church in purgatory is remembered and interceded for. These are not sentimental customs, they are spiritual realities. Faustina saw what they actually accomplish. She saw the relief they bring to suffering souls. She saw prayers as a kind of light that breaks into a misty, half-illumined place and draws souls closer to the source of all light. And she could not remain silent about what she saw. The souls in purgatory, Faustina learned, cannot help themselves. This is perhaps the hardest thing about their condition, not the suffering, not even the longing, but the helplessness. They have no more time. Their time on earth, the time in which merit could be accumulated and penance could be done and prayers could be offered, is finished. They can receive help. They can be prayed for. They can be assisted by the living Church. But they cannot generate new merit for themselves. They are utterly, entirely dependent on love arriving from outside themselves. They are, in the deepest possible way, at the mercy of others. The souls in purgatory, Faustina learned, cannot help themselves. This is perhaps the hardest thing about their condition, not the suffering, not even the longing, but the helplessness. They have no more time. Their time on earth, the time in which merit could be accumulated and penance could be done and prayers could be offered, is finished. They can receive help. They can be prayed for. They can be assisted by the living Church, but they cannot generate new merit for themselves. They are utterly, entirely dependent on love arriving from outside themselves. They are, in the deepest possible way, at the mercy of others. And here is something that Faustina understood with unusual depth. This helplessness is not an accident. It is not a flaw in the divine architecture. It is, in a sense, the final stage of the very lesson that every Christian life is meant to teach, the lesson of dependence, of the impossibility of self-sufficiency, of the necessity of receiving rather than simply achieving. The souls in purgatory have arrived at a place where there is nothing left to do but receive. They cannot pray for themselves with any new merit. They cannot perform acts of love that generate fresh grace. They can only wait and long and accept what is given to them from outside. In this way, their condition is a pure reflection of what all of us are before God at every moment, utterly dependent, incapable of earning our way by our own efforts alone, entirely reliant on the love and mercy of another. Purgatory, in this sense, is not a detour from the journey toward God. It is its completion. Faustina received this knowledge not as an abstract theological point, but as a lived reality that shaped how she spent her days. She offered her sufferings for the souls in purgatory. She prayed for the dead constantly. She encouraged others to do the same. And she understood that this was not a pious extra, a devotional addition for the particularly fervent. It was a work of mercy. And not just any work of mercy, but one of the most pressing works of mercy available to us, because the souls in purgatory have no one else to turn to, and because what they need most is precisely what we have the ability to give. There is something in Faustina's account of purgatory that speaks directly to the grief of the living, to those who have lost someone suddenly, to those who carry the weight of not knowing whether a deceased loved one died in peace with God, to those who fear that the person they buried without last rites or without a death that looked holy is somehow beyond help. Faustina's testimony is a direct and gentle answer to that grief. It says, pray for them, keep praying for them. The soul you loved and lost is not inaccessible. It is not gone beyond all reach. The love you still carry for them in your chest can be converted through prayer and through the offering of your own daily sufferings into actual grace that reaches the place they are in and helps them move through it toward the light. You are not helpless in the face of their death. You are, if you choose to be, one of the instruments of their liberation. Faustina's own experience of suffering gave her a particular sensitivity to the suffering of souls in purgatory. She was not theorizing from comfort. She was writing from a body that ached, from lungs that had been ravaged by disease, from a spirit that had endured years of misunderstanding and spiritual darkness that she describes with devastating honesty in the pages of her diary. She knew what it was to suffer towards something, to endure a present pain in the hope of a future wholeness that had not yet arrived. In this way, her own life was a kind of purgatory, not in the theological sense, but in the experiential sense. She understood from the inside what it meant to long for God while being held, temporarily, in a condition of incompleteness. And she used that understanding to intercede, with unusual depth and precision, for souls whose longing was far more intense than anything she could experience on earth. The misty light that she perceived in purgatory, that quality of illumination that is neither the full darkness of hell nor the blazing noon of heaven, is one of the most evocative images in her entire diary. It speaks of transition, of process, of something unfinished that is moving toward its finishing. There is hope in that mist. There is mercy in it. But there is also a kind of ache, the ache of being able to see the light, to know that it is there, to know that you are moving toward it, but to not yet have arrived, to stand in the foyer of a warmth you can feel but not yet fully inhabit. The souls in purgatory are not in despair. Despair is not possible for a saved soul, but they are in longing, and it is a longing so pure and so enormous that it is itself a form of suffering, the last and most refining form of the suffering that love requires. What Faustina brings back from all of this, what she carries into her prayers and her daily life and ultimately into her diary for us to read, is something very simple and very urgent. Do not forget the dead. Do not imagine that when a person stops breathing, they stop needing. Do not let the busyness of life and the amnesia that grief sometimes produces make you abandon the practice of praying for those who have gone before you. Light a candle for them. Offer your daily difficulties for them. Pray the rosary with their names in your mind. Attend Mass and ask that the grace of the Eucharist flow to them. And if you have lost someone whose death was not peaceful, whose life was troubled, whose faith was complicated or absent, pray for them especially. Not because you know the state of their soul. You do not and cannot know that. But because the mercy of God is larger than anything we can calculate, and because a prayer offered in love for a soul in purgatory is never wasted, never lost, never returned empty. Faustina herself died on October 5, 1938, after years of illness that had reduced her to a fragile shadow of a woman. She died peacefully, in the convent in Krakow with her face, witnesses said, lit by something that no one in the room could account for. She had spent her last years writing, praying, suffering, and interceding. She had spent them, in part, at the edge of that misty place she had glimpsed in vision, calling out to the souls there, telling them that they were not forgotten, that the living church remembered them, that mercy was not finished with them yet. She knew because she had been shown that they could hear her. She knew that her prayers reached them. She knew that every candle lit for the dead was, in the economy of God, a real light breaking into a real place where real souls were waiting in real longing. She knew that love does not end at death. It extends through it. It flows across the boundary between the living and the dead, with the same tenderness it flows between any two people who love each other and are temporarily separated. The souls in purgatory desire most to be with God. That is the core of everything Faustina saw and heard from them. But in the meantime, in the misty, in-between, longing stretched time of their purification, what they desire second most is prayer. Our prayer. Yours and mine, and the prayer of anyone who has ever loved someone and lost them and wondered what on earth to do with that love now. What to do with it is this: offer it. Pour it into prayer. Send it through the boundary of death, in the form of intercession and sacrifice, and the offering of your own daily sufferings for souls who cannot help themselves, but who are being helped, quietly and constantly, by the invisible movement of the communion of saints. That is the answer that Faustina carried out of the misty light. That is the wisdom she recorded in her diary, so that we would not have to guess, and consider what it means that God arranged things this way. He could have designed a universe in which the purification of souls after death was entirely automatic, entirely self-contained, entirely independent of the actions of the living. He did not. He designed it so that the prayers of the living are not just useful, but necessary, not in the sense that God is limited by our prayers, but in the sense that He has chosen, in His wisdom, to include our love in the mechanism of another soul's liberation. He could have acted alone. He chose to act through us. He invited us into the work. And the invitation is still open every day, every hour, every time we remember someone we have lost and feel the old ache of their absence rise up in our chest like a tide. That ache is not meaningless. It is not merely grief. It is love that has not finished what it started, and love that has not finished what it started has somewhere to go. It can be poured into prayer, lifted into intercession, offered in the form of the daily small crosses that each human life carries. The frustrations, the disappointments, the physical pain, the loneliness, the weariness that comes with living in a world that is not yet redeemed in the fullness it was promised. All of this can be offered. All of it can be directed. None of it needs to be wasted. Faustina knew this. She lived this. She offered everything. Every cough from her diseased lungs, every hour of sleeplessness, every moment of misunderstanding from her sisters. For souls in purgatory and for the dying. She turned her entire life into a kind of perpetual intercession. And she invites us through the pages of her diary to do something of the same, not at her scale, not with her intensity, but in whatever small measure our ordinary days allow. That is what the souls in purgatory desire most, and it is something that if we are willing we can give them today. Jesus, have mercy on the souls in purgatory. And on the day of our own death, may someone remember to pray for us.